Do you remember what the survival rate was of the Bloody 100th?
4 completed a tour.
4.
And that's a 90% loss. The cold, freezing to death.
To death.
Cold air froze my feet to the rudders. All their fingers could self-amputate.
Freezing.
And you wouldn't feel anything. You wouldn't have any pain. You wouldn't have any blood. You just see your fingers lying on the floor.
You saw that?
If you survived what we did, it's damn lucky.
It's damn lucky. You've been interviewed by Spielberg, Apple TV, and Masters of the Air is on there. Kevin Maurer is one of the most accomplished war authors, and he wrote a biography of you, The Living Legend. This is what's so amazing. We sent young men, often who were completely undertrained, and you came home, and then they trained you after you had already flown 25 missions in war.
You cannot assume that current generations would not respond as nobly as we did. You don't know. You don't know until you're called on to defend all of your liberties and all of your values. We didn't know what we could do or would do until we were placed in that position.
People do rise to the level of what they're asked. What do you attribute that to?
Scotch.
That was true. Welcome to Major John Lucky Luckadoo. Mr. Luckadoo or Major Luckadoo. I just said to you over here, how should I address you, sir? And you said, just whistle. And I said, I wouldn't dare, because I'm sitting here with a man who is a living legend. And I even said to you, when you are a living legend, it doesn't feel much like one, does it?
No, it really does not.
Yeah.
In some cases, it gets uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because people think they know you.
Right.
And they don't hesitate to come up and say, want to unburden to you or ask you questions. And if I go out to a restaurant, it's hard to eat.
Yeah.
Because people will invariably come up and say, well, I had a relative who was a ball turret gunner or was a pilot in World War II, or I've read the book and want to ask you this or that or the other thing. So it's not uncommon to be approached, both personally, by mail, by phone, constantly.
Well, I have so much I want to talk to you about, because I have read your book. I've watched the documentary Steven Spielberg did with you called The Bloody 100th, where he interviewed you. So I'll be honest with you. I'm sitting. You've been interviewed by Spielberg. You have a book. Kevin Maurer is one of the most accomplished war story authors who's written numerous books. He wrote a myopic on you. He wrote a biography of you.
Yes.
And I love the title of it. Tell them what the title is of your book.
Well, during the course of his interviewing me to gather information, I said, Kevin, you've never written about the air war. You don't know the vernacular or the terms or circumstances under which we served. And he said, no, but I'm a quick learner. And he was. Yeah. He did research like you would not believe to fill himself in as to what the Luftwaffe was, how the Germans retaliated, and how they conducted their end of the war, and also the British.
Yeah.
Because, of course, after Pearl Harbor, we finally got engaged. We did not have the support of the American populace.
You're talking about Pearl Harbor is what got us engaged.
Yes.
It's what got you engaged, too. And I want to get there, but tell everybody real quick the name of the book that Kevin and you wrote.
Oh, it's Damn Lucky.
It's damn lucky.
And that really is the bottom line. I don't mean to be profane.
That's it. Damn lucky right there.
But I just mean that if you survive what we did,
Yeah.
And particularly at the time we did it, you were just incredibly lucky.
Well,
and the odds of your doing so were so minimal.
Do you remember the stats from the Bloody 100th? So let me just frame a few things here. This is Major John Luckadoo, nicknamed Lucky. Like, I'm Todd Wagner. My nickname's Wags. I guess we shortened our last name, right? One of the guys that flew with you, his nickname was Rosie. His last name was Rosenthal, right?
Yes.
And they called him Rosie.
That's right.
So we shortened last names a lot, and so Wags and Lucky are two good middle names. But and you flew for what came to be known as the Bloody 100th in World War II, and you are 103 years young. I think you might have grandchildren older than me.
Well, you never know how long you're. In fact, when I speak to school children, as I do quite frequently, and somebody says, "Well, what is your advice to the younger generation?" And I said, "Well, the bottom line is you just live every day to your fullest." Yeah. Because you don't know if it'll be your last. And I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I could walk out of here and be hit by a truck. And it's really a matter of having a guardian angel on each shoulder.
So
if you survive.
What is your birthday? Tell me your birthday.
March the 16th. It was just 2 weeks ago.
And you turned 103.
103.
So 1922. Unbelievable. Wow. And let's go back to something you said, because I want to walk through, because I've gotten to know you because of all the material that's out there about you. How many interviews do you think you've done, Lucky, over your career here?
You want to know the truth?
Yes.
Over 200.
Over 200. Yep. Are there any of them that just pop and stick out and you're like, this one, I really remember it because it was my first, or because it was with this person? Was it getting interviewed by Spielberg? Did that seem different to you?
Well, Spielberg did not actually interview me, nor did Tom Hanks.
Okay. They just,
however, the author
okay.
of Masters of the Air, Donald Miller, okay. Dr. Donald Miller.
Yep.
He's interviewed me numerous times.
Okay.
And that was one of the things that sort of sticks in my craw, is that when Dr. Miller was the first to interview me in 2013.
Wow.
In Savannah, Georgia. And
so people that are watching, I want them to know they can go to Apple TV, and Masters of the Air is on there, as well as the 1 hour some odd documentary voiced over by Hanks, produced, I guess, by Spielberg, called The Bloody 100th, which you're featured primarily.
That's correct.
Yeah. And so you want to learn more of Lucky's story, you can watch it, an incredible series that's on Apple TV. But you're saying Donald Miller, the author of that, he interviewed you first in 2013, because the show just came out in the last year. So that's how long that's been in production.
It is, and it was initially being produced by HBO.
Okay.
And they got in over their heads. It became so frightfully expensive to reproduce the old air base in England, and they actually were taken over by Verizon. And so they put it out to bid, and unfortunately, Apple picked it up.
Yep.
And they have deep pockets, so that is how it got completed. At that point, it was just about to be.
Well, I have not. I personally haven't finished the whole series. I'm going to, but the book by Kevin, I've enjoyed, and then the interview that you did on the Bloody 100th. Let me just go back to something you said, because let's just begin this story, because you said that earlier Pearl Harbor is kind of what got us into the war. What's so amazing, right? This is the day now, December 7th, 1940. What was it? 41 is the day that will live in infamy. I've got the December 7th down. I didn't have the 41, didn't come right to my tongue. But you were 16? How old were you in 41? Let me do the math.
22? No, in 41 I was 19.
19 years old. Okay. And
or 18, I'm sorry.
Okay, 18, because your birthday so 18 in 41. And so, what is interesting, you'd even never heard the words Pearl Harbor before, right?
No, had not.
Didn't know what it was.
And as a matter of fact, when my best friend and I graduated from high school in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in 1940, we saw that the war clouds completely covered all of Europe. They were deeply embroiled. We were aware that Prime Minister Churchill was leaning heavily on President Roosevelt
to get involved,
to send troops and to support and help Britain defend itself against the pending invasion by the Nazis
of England, right? He was,
because they had completely captured all of Europe.
Yep.
And all of Europe was under the Third Reich's control. So if they crossed the North Sea, the English Channel, and actually took over England, then it was just another stop to our East Coast.
Yep.
And Roosevelt did not have the support of the populace. Mm-hmm. They said, no, it's not our affair. It's a European conflict, and we're not involved, and we don't want to be involved. And so he was doing all he could and did to supply them with war material and loans and support them financially. But he couldn't send troops. Mm. And so my best friend and I said, well, we want to learn to fly. The best thing we could do is go to Canada and join the Royal Canadian Air Force.
Yep. You and Sully is your friend, right?
Sully, my friend, Sully. Yep. And Sully was an only child. His dad had been severely injured in the First World War.
By mustard gas,
and died before Sully ever knew him. And he was all his mother had. And so we applied to Canada, and they said, sure, we'd love to have you. We'd love to train you. And here's the application. And at the bottom it said, because you're underage, you must have parental consent.
Yeah.
So we went to Sully's mother and laid out our plan to go and get our training, and then, as we inevitably thought would happen, once America got involved, we could transfer to what was then the Army Air Corps.
Mm-hmm. There was no Air Force.
There was no Air Force. It was part of the Army.
Yeah.
And we'd already be trained, we'd have our commissions, and we'd be a step ahead of all of our comrades. And we thought that was pretty cool. So when we presented it to Mrs. Sullivan, she said, well, Sully, if you really feel that you must do this, then you have my blessing. Well, I thought,
one down, one to go. Now let's just get your dad to sign off.
Yeah, so I'll go home and present it to my family, and should be no problem, because if she's willing to let her only offspring go fight the war, why wouldn't my family? And so when I presented it to my mother, she said, well, I'm amazed that Mrs. Sullivan would agree, but as long as she has, and I hate to see you all do this, but if you feel you must, I won't stand in your way. but you have to prove to your father.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when Dad came home and he heard about it, he said, "You blithering idiots, you don't have any idea."
He didn't say you were damn lucky. He said you were a damn fool if you were going to go, right? I think
he thought it was a cockamamie idea, and that it was certainly nothing that he would support. And he said, "I wouldn't give you my consent over my dead body.
Mm-hmm.
You get back in school." So I went on to college.
Well, you were Chattanooga
there
Moccasin?
in Chattanooga, University of Chattanooga.
Was that the Moccasins? Is that right?
Yeah.
You know they just won the NIT? You know what the NIT is in basketball?
Yep.
Were you watching it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they just won the NIT.
And
they're not so famous for that. They're famous
that was a far cry from what it was when I was there, but because it was just a little liberal arts college then.
Mm-hmm.
It was not part of the University of Tennessee. And there were only about 500 students.
Wow.
But
Sully did go. He actually joined, and we'll come back to him in a minute.
Yes.
But he got in the Royal Air Force up there in Canada.
Yeah, he did, and was trained on Spitfires. Went through the North African campaign and Egypt, and meanwhile, 1941 rolled around, and boom, Pearl Harbor occurred, and then there wasn't any question about my parental consent
because they lowered the age, right?
Because I was, cannon fodder. I was.
You know what was interesting to me? I didn't realize this. I think there was like only 130,000 people in the military at that time in 19,
yes.
And all of a sudden we needed hundreds of thousands.
A million.
So, they were trying to get to a million.
10 times that much.
And so they lowered the age. They lowered, the marriage requirement was thrown out. I think it went from 18 to 60 at that point. Is that right? Where they'd let you in. And because we needed millions of individuals in our military. And there's John Luckadoo from Chattanooga who wanted to go and serve, and you enlisted, you got accepted, and you filed to be a pilot, and they took you. You know, one of the most interesting things, there was a couple things that really popped for me, because you talk about how lucky you were. And we're going to come back to that term lucky, because I'm really curious about it. I mean, I know it's a great abbreviation of your name, but I think you were more than lucky. I think there's providence, even providence that we're sitting here today, right?
Oh, it's bound to be.
Yes, sir.
I quite agree.
But what's interesting, two things. The very first time, okay, because you were eventually trained to be a pilot, but when you fly out of England, what do you always fly into almost every time you take off? Clouds, right?
Fog, clouds, rain.
And you were a pilot, a co-pilot, captaining a B-17 that had 10 crew. Yes, sir?
10 on the crew.
And you were not VFR. You were not trained to fly in anything but with sight.
Well, what was worse, if I might interject, was one of the things that happened to the 100th that didn't happen to any other group. And that is that when I graduated from advanced flight training and got my wings and my commission in Valdosta, Georgia, in February of 1943, they took 40 members of my class and me and immediately sent us to Kearney, Nebraska, where the 100th Bomb Group had already been through pre-combat training, ready to be sent overseas. They pulled all the co-pilots out and stuck us in the right seat, and we'd never been in a B-17. Never had any four-engine experience at all.
And now you're a co-pilot.
And now we're second in command of the 10-man crew. If anything happens to the pilot, you're it. Well, the morale of the crews just tanked. And the crew that I was on, the navigator and the bombardier, who were the only other two commissioned officers on the crew, dearly loved the guy I replaced.
Mr. Townsend, wasn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I never knew him, but they partied with him and buddied with him, and they were, just shoulder to shoulder. They'd trained together, and they were very, very fond of him. And here this new shale tail that's never been in a B-17 gets put in charge.
Who doesn't know how to read instruments.
And I didn't know anything about the airplane. I didn't know anything about the crew. We didn't have a clue as to what we were going to be confronted with.
Right.
But we just knew that we had to take orders, and that's what we did. And so those two guys in the nose just made my life hell.
Yeah, they bullied you.
Yeah, they bullied me, and the pilot didn't take he didn't condone it or condemn it. He didn't enter into it at all. He just acted like it wasn't happening.
Was that Dye?
Yeah, it was Dye.
Yeah.
Glenn Dye.
Yeah,
and so they were attempting to get me to resign or ask for a transfer.
Yeah.
And Lord knows what they would have gotten in my place. But that wasn't the point. The point was that they just hated my guts. And they made everything they could, did everything they could to make my life miserable.
Well, this is what's so amazing is when you look at what we sent over there, we sent young men often who were completely undertrained. And one of the things that you ran into when you would get up in your B-17 flying over a target is, surviving the shrapnel that was sent up from anti-aircraft gunnery, and then you'd run into the Luftwaffe. These weren't boys. These were trained military pilots that had already fought in a war against Russia. And
been fighting for 4 years.
And you're up. And again, I could not believe when I heard that you had not even been trained how to fly without eyesight. And it really became obvious to me later in your book when it talks about how when you were out and you had flown your 25th mission, you came home, they assigned you, and then they trained you how to do VFR after you had already flown 25 missions in war. Do you remember what the survival rate was of the Bloody 100th?
Well, I remember that out of the 40 of us from my class that went to the 100th,
yes, sir,
4 completed a tour.
4, which was 25 missions.
So that was 25 missions.
Wow.
And that's a 90% loss. Only a tenth of us finished.
Of the whole whole thing. Individuals like me that forgive me, I wish I knew more about the military, but there's that hat we were talking about before we started filming, the 100th Bomb Group. So a group is made up of 4 squadrons. And correct me, I'm asking now.
That's correct.
A squadron is 25 planes.
No, 12.
Okay. 12. Okay. So 10, if there's 10 crew in a plane, all right, that's 120 times 4. So that would be what was that? 480 make up a group. Is that correct math, right? And so 400. You're saying of the 480 that were part of the 100th group, the initial group that went there, there was 4 of your group of 40, and 90% of those men didn't come back.
Well, out of the original group,
yeah,
that flew our airplanes across the North Atlantic to the combat zone, in the first 90 days of combat, only 86% were lost.
We're lost.
Only 14% survived.
All right, so let's talk about some of that because, here's what's interesting is I'm going to say this kind of tongue in cheek, but I've talked to you before, and you don't know. There's no reason you should know this because in February of this year I was in New Orleans, and I was at the World War II Museum, and one of their lead docents there was taking us around and showing us the World War II Museum. Have you been there?
No, of course.
I bet you have. And
I'm going again next month.
And when I was there, that one display where they have an AI generated, right, 3D setup, I asked him, hey, because he was sharing with me what they've done there, and you because I'm going to give away my story here a little bit, but you've been interviewed by them.
Yes.
Right? For what, 3 hours or something? And
2 days.
2 days. And it's set up so I can select from a list of men like you that served in World War II, and then you appear, and I can ask you a question. And then it takes my question, and it reads through all of your answers, and then you talk back to me. And so it was interesting. The reason I talked to you is because I said, well, who's your favorite of all the people that you've interviewed here? Who's your favorite individual that you like to watch them share their story? And this gentleman said Luckadoo.
Oh, really?
He did. He said And so I said, let's pull up Lucky. And then little did I know how lucky I was going to be to get to visit with you personally.
Well, bless you.
This was such a privilege.
Well, Todd, that program was sponsored by the National War Museum in New Orleans. And they flew us out to Hollywood for a week. And I spent 2 days. And this was during COVID. They asked me 850 questions.
Wow.
And I had to be in precisely the same position at the beginning of the question and at the end of each question, so it wouldn't be jerky when it scrolled to the answer when you asked me a question.
Yeah.
But 100 years from now, someone could walk up and say, well, Lucky, what was your worst mission? Or what did you gain from your combat experience? And boom, it'll come up with my answer.
Well, I asked you several questions, and I when you're flying those 25 missions, there's two things I want to make sure. One is that I couldn't believe that you flew all those missions through clouds, because there's some stories that you share about, you're having to slowly make your way up, and sometimes you don't even know where other people are. You don't even know, because vertigo sets in. It's tough to even know what direction you're flying.
That's right.
And you survived all of that. You survived the Luftwaffe. You survived the anti-aircraft. You survived being undertrained. And then was it your second mission? They came up to you and said, we're putting somebody in the co-pilot seat, and they stuck you in the rear gunnery.
Tail.
And you had never fired
a 50 caliber.
A 50 cal. And so you're back there protecting the back of the B-17, and you had never fired one. And then what'd you do? Tell everybody what you did when you were back there.
Well, when we came under attack, and I was scared spitless.
Yep.
I just was spraying lead all over the skies. If I hit anything, it was accidental.
Yep.
And I didn't know, ignorant as I was, that if you just bore down on the triggers, you'd burn out the barrels.
Which is what you did.
And which is exactly what I did.
So the very first time
So for the first time, I was sitting back there with guns that were frozen, and I said, my guns are frozen, I can't fire anything. And they said, well, you just report the planes that are going down and what attacks are taking place from your vantage point. So when I got back, I said, this is ridiculous.
Yep.
You didn't train me to fire a gun. You trained me to fly the airplane.
Wow.
And I'm not going to get in the tail again. I don't care what you do to me. I'm not flying in the tail again.
Yep.
And they said, well, in that case, when your crew leads the formation, then you'll have to sit on the ground. And I said, gladly.
Yep, and you did. Let me ask you a question. Did that crew, in one of the missions you didn't go on, did they ever not make it back?
No, the crew that I was assigned to actually did the fastest tour that was ever done in the European theater.
The reason I was asking is just if there was any providence in that the plane that you were on one time didn't make it back. But no, they actually did the 25 flights quickly, and they were gone. Because that's right, because your last 4 missions was with a completely different crew, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, 22, 23, 24, 25.
Different squadron.
Yeah, you had a different squadron to finish your duty.
Yeah, after the crew I was assigned to completed their tour, they were rotated back to the States, and I still had 4 more missions to go.
So let me ask you a question. You were an 18-year-old. You heard about this conflict in Europe and this evil of fascism that was growing. You wanted to get in the war so much that you were willing to go and get ahead of the game and get trained up there by the Canadian Air Force. And then when your dad said no, you went back to school. And then when Pearl Harbor happened, you got permission to go ahead and sign your own papers and go. When you look at 18, 19, 20-year-olds today, how, there's this thing called perpetual adolescence where you just don't see young men growing today the way they did back in the 40s. Tell me, how does that make you feel when you look at today's generation? What do you say to young 16, 17-year-olds today to try and instill in them some of that was embedded into you? And why do you think it's so different?
Well, I think, to be fair and to be honest, is that you cannot assume that current generations would not respond as nobly, as you want to call it, as we did. You don't know.
Yeah, and we did see some of that after.
You don't know until you're
9/11.
placed in that position and you're called on to defend all of your liberties and all of your values, and you do what you have to do. We didn't know what we could do or would do under those circumstances until we were placed in that position.
That's one of the things you say, and I was so encouraged by your humility, Lucky, that you just said, well, I was really naive about what war was, right? We had no idea what we were signing up for.
We were guinea pigs. I'm just reading currently a book called The Bomber Mafia, which is about a half a dozen high-ranking Air Force officers that between World War I and World War II in the 1930s were over at Montgomery Field, Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama, at the Air and General Staff School. And they got together and they analyzed, they thought, what war was about, the air war would be about in the current generation or the current days. And they devised this high-altitude daylight bombing theory that with fighter escort and the Norden bomb site, that they could hit a target within drop a bomb within a pickle barrel from 30,000 feet.
Yeah.
Never happened.
But they're the reason, basically, that the 100th existed, because those men sold that idea that a war could be won with superior air dominance.
Well, they not only sold it, but they insisted upon it. And even though Sir Arthur Harris, the head of the RAF bomber force, begged General Akert to abandon daylight bombing. He said, you'll never be able to withstand the losses. The Germans have air superiority over all of Europe. They're too experienced, they're too well equipped, and they'll just decimate you.
So when in your book, you said there were 4 things that were against you when you got up to go on a mission.
Yeah, we had 4 enemies instead of 1.
First one was?
The first one was fear.
Fear.
We were just literally scared because we had no clue as to what, and no one could tell us really what to expect. And so we were just citizen soldiers that were thrust into this position of defending our democracy. And the second was the fighters. The fighters were so well equipped, so well experienced. They had fought on the Eastern Front against the Russians and the West against the British. And they knew what they were doing, and they knew what to expect.
That was the Luftwaffe, right?
And that was the Luftwaffe. And they were the most formidable air force in the world.
Yep.
And the third was their flak.
Yeah.
Their anti-aircraft fire was, they didn't think they could reach us at 25 to 29,000 feet. Heck, they could go to 30 or 35,000 feet with their missiles. They had developed some rudimentary radar that could track our course, our altitude, the winds, and that sort of thing, and box us in. The guns were electronically fired automatically. So all they needed was Hitler used just to load the guns.
You know what I didn't know until I read your book was they didn't need to hit your planes. They sent them up almost like a firework. Yes, that exploded and sent out shrapnel. It was shrapnel that would then pierce these paper-thin B-17s.
That's right.
I remember when you said that you were in the back in the gunnery, all you had covering your feet was a canvas sack. How did you? I mean, let's get to the fourth, because that's the anti-artillery. And then the fourth one was, what was the fourth one? You remember?
Well, it was freezing.
The cold.
The cold. It was 50 to 60 degrees below zero.
How did you survive? Because that's higher than Mount Everest when you get up to 30,000 feet, which is where you would fly.
Well, we had a hard time surviving because, of course, you had to be on oxygen, supplemental oxygen.
Yeah.
You put on all of this heavy equipment that you could wear, heated underwear, fleece-lined leather flying equipment, and you even plugged into the electrical system to heat your suit, but it usually shorted out. But the sum total of it was that you were freezing to death.
To death.
And that seriously impacted your ability to fly and to function.
That I didn't even think about the fact that you were largely in an open system. And again, when you're in the back, all you've got is canvas over your feet at 25, 30,000 feet.
Well, the gunners, the waist gunners, in the waist of the airplane were standing in an open window, manning their guns.
And for 6+ hours at a time.
Whatever it took.
That's
and the ironic thing was that as a pilot, you're jockeying for position in the formation, trying to stay in formation for mutual protection, and you're flying the airplane, and all of a sudden, as cold as it was, you realize you're perspiring profusely. And that perspiration freezes like that and forms ice crystals in your oxygen mask, and you're having to break those up with one hand and fly the airplane with the other. And those gunners that were standing out in that open window, if they took their gloves off, their
immediate frostbite.
Their hand all their fingers could self-amputate to the knuckles.
Just because it like break off almost, freezing.
And you wouldn't feel anything. You wouldn't have any pain. You wouldn't have any blood. You just see your fingers lying on the floor.
You saw that happen.
We saw that happen.
Unbelievable.
And the only physical wound that I experienced in my tour, thank God, was frostbitten feet. On one mission, we got a piece of shrapnel that penetrated the plastic nose, and it sent this jet of cold air directly onto my feet and froze my feet to the rudders solidly. And I had to operate with my heels. And so when I got back, it didn't affect anybody else to that same degree, but when we landed, I couldn't stand up. I couldn't get out of the airport.
Yeah, you were.
They had to chip my feet loose and send me up to the hospital and pack my feet in ice, and then gradually warm them up to normal temperature, or I would have lost my toes.
Can I tell you? This is a true story. When I was at the World War II Museum, after I got done talking with you and I went through a bunch of other different exhibits, I needed to use the restroom. and I felt like I needed to use the women's restroom because I wasn't a man. After watching what you had been through, I said, I got to sit down to pee like women do because I'm clearly not the men that these guys were. I appreciate your humility, Lucky, when you say that people do rise to the level of what they're asked. And, but I just want to tell you again, thank you. Thank you for your example. I mean, what I'm also just sitting here, I'm just amazed by, we're 42 years different in age. I'm 61. Right? How lucid your mind is, and how the fact that I could read a book and remember some things that I just recently read. The fact that I know it's your book because I read some things. Oh yeah, here are the 4 things that were in the book, right? And I'm just what do you, just as a separate side question, what do you attribute your youthful mind to, and your energy, and the fact that we had to wait several weeks to get our schedule together because you're speaking so many places. You're still living a very active life.
Absolutely.
So, what do you attribute the quickness of your mind and the virility that you have in life? What do you attribute that to?
Scotch.
That was true. You've been pretty hard on that scotch since you were 18, but according to your book. Do you have a favorite scotch?
Johnny Walker Black.
Well, and let me ask you, as much as you drank in that book, did you ever feel like you were an alcoholic or struggled with alcoholism?
I felt that I could have been, but alcohol, strangely enough, doesn't have that much appeal to me. I like my nightly scotch. But I never get drunk. It's 1 or 2.
Well, you used to. You used to. But your hangovers used to have hangovers, I think, is one of the lines.
Yeah. But when I got back from overseas, and I didn't have a job, I didn't have anything to do, I didn't have any responsibility.
And that's when you started drinking more.
And I'd had my nose to the grindstone for a year.
Yeah.
Then. Sure, we were rationed to a 5th of whiskey a day in Miami.
You were rationed a 5th of
rationed.
Whiskey.
You could walk into any bar and order up and drink all you could hold, but we would swap our cigarettes to other guys for their coupons.
Yeah, you gave the smokers your smoking coupons and took their whiskey coupons or their scotch coupons.
Yeah. But
that
you're young, you're frivolous. I was suffering from PTSD and didn't have a clue. Yeah. Nobody did, and I'd been out all night one night dancing and drinking and carousing, and I got back to the Book Cadillac Hotel that there were at the redistribution center, and they said, "Lucky, you better look at the bulletin board." And I said, "Why?" They said, "You better look." So I did, and it said, "Luckadoo, full physical, 8 a.m."
It used to mean you were going to fly, right? But this time you're out. You've already done your missions, and now it's going to be you're going to get a physical.
So I walk in, I take a cold shower and report, and they hand me a 14-page questionnaire. Are you irritable? Are you having nightmares? Do you wet the bed? Or, all these silly questions. Yeah, sure. I didn't give a darn about their survey. And I just turned it in and went up to the next phase, which was the dentist. And I was sitting in a dentist chair, and they came screaming down the hall, "Captain Luckadoo, Captain Luckadoo, where is Captain Luckadoo?" So the dentist said, "Hey, mister, that's you." So this corporal comes in, and he's got my questionnaire with a big red stamp across the face, "Stop processing." And he said, "Sir, would you please come with me?" Mm-hmm. And he takes me into the psychiatrist, who's a little major that hits me about chest high. And he looks over this questionnaire and he said, "My God, man," he said, "you be on the train this afternoon at 5 o'clock for St. Petersburg, Florida, to the rehab hospital.
6 weeks.
For 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Or else you'll be court-martialed." And so they sent me over there, and I languished for another, without anything to do but lie on the beach or play volleyball.
What was the rank, the captain that was there, or whoever was over that particular thing? First, he tried to get you to be his personal pilot, right?
Yeah, well, the colonel, full colonel.
Full colonel.
He called me in and he said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Sir, I don't know. All I need is something to do, some responsibility. I mean, I'm accustomed to it, and I've got this experience that I should be relating to those that are going over and facing it, so they'll know what to expect. And I don't have any assignment." And he said, "Well, I'm entitled to my own airplane, but I'm not a pilot. And would you consider staying here if I get my plane and be my private pilot?"
Wow.
And I said, "Well, sir, with all due respect, I don't think that's the proper use of what I've been through and what I can impart to the service to those who are going to face it. That what I did and give them a little better chance."
Yeah.
And he said, well, he was sorry, but I'd still have to stay 6 weeks, and I'd still have to report every morning at 8 o'clock for roll call. But otherwise,
go drink. He sent you to the bar.
go down to the corner bar.
That's a different military, right? Like you were there for PTSD rehab or maybe alcoholism. Who knows what they thought you had? But stop process. They sent you to the psychiatric hospital, and that guy, once you wouldn't fly for him, he said, "Well, just be here at 8 in the morning, but go drink. Use your rations."
That's right. Well, you know, Todd, the realization is very obvious that nobody goes to war and gets shot at and comes back the same person.
Well, talk to me about that. When someone says to you, "What's PTSD?" Describe PTSD. You said you thought you had it, or you did have it.
Well, it affects your psychological well-being, and you're not really sure of your footing or your status, or you don't trust your instincts and that sort of thing. You're suffering from combat fatigue. Mm-hmm. And the British called it lack of moral fiber. And they punished members of the RAF who wouldn't fly because they had PTSD. And they didn't know what it was, but they fined them, or they threw them in jail, or they put them in the infantry or something. The Air Corps was a little bit more considerate, and we'd send them off to a rest home for a week or 10 days, get them away completely from the war element, and see if they couldn't rehabilitate and
you're talking about the Americans.
Stabilized, yes.
Yeah, because over there, like even some of the guys that were part of the Bloody 100th and other groups that were with you that were over there were some men that they couldn't make it through all 25 missions.
No, they couldn't.
And we didn't punish them. We'd send them to rest and try and get some recovery and then bring them back. But some men, they just gave medical leave and sent home. Yes?
It didn't work for everybody, but for some it did.
Yeah.
And
so what do you?
I never went to a rest home. I never quit, or I never got leave.
Yeah. What do you attribute though? What do you see in men like yourself that had the capacity to endure that? And you said it affected you when you got home, and obviously, like you said, no man ever returns from war the same way. But what was it about the guys that you felt like could endure the missions, and the guys that couldn't fulfill their initial commitment?
Well, that was one of the things that I was 21 years old then, that I had to evaluate, because I was in a position to say, hey, you fly or you don't fly. And I want you to fly in this position or that position or with this on this mission or that mission. And so you had to be a psychiatrist and a chaplain and a commander, an administrator, a pilot.
Yep.
Command pilot.
Yeah.
Because when you flew, either or your squadron led, either the operations officer or the squadron commander would be the command pilot that would replace the co-pilot to go back and fly in the tail position. So it was heavy responsibility for that tender age.
Yeah.
And you grew up in a hurry.
Yeah.
You had to mature overnight and either measure up or get the heck out.
So, Lucky, did you have a faith? You know, when you talk about being a chaplain, did you grow up in any kind of home with any kind of spiritual guidance? Was that a part of your story as a young man?
Well, I grew up in a Baptist family.
Okay.
And my dad was a deacon in the First Baptist Church, and we went to Sunday school, and we believed in the Ten Commandments, and the sixth was, thou shalt not kill. And I'd be sitting up there at 29,000 feet and say, yeah, but you've been trained as a killer.
Right.
And you either kill or be killed.
Yeah.
So you're arguing or debating with your own consciousness, your morality as well as your morality,
yeah,
and mortality,
yeah,
and that's a plateful for
because when you're dropping a bomb from 30,000 feet, despite what the bomber mafia says, you're not going to hit a pickle barrel. And there was many times.
No, that bomb site was a myth.
Yeah.
The theory and strategy of having a fighter escort was a myth because they were twice as fast as bombers, so they had to orbit and burn up all the fuel, and then they had to leave and go home and refuel. And that's when the Germans jumped you. Supposedly another group of escorts would come in and replace them, but that seldom ever happened in reality.
Yeah.
That in theory, it's great on paper, but it doesn't work that way.
The book talks a little bit about your dad. I know you said he was a deacon at the Baptist Church. Did you and your dad have a good relationship? You and your father?
Well, my dad was a hard taskmaster. He left home at 16, ran away, I think because he was abused, but I never knew. And he didn't brook much interference. He was, my way or the highway.
Yeah.
And
he was a horseman. He raised Arabian horses. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. His only love was horses, and his only vacation was to go to the Kentucky.
Yeah.
Go to the Kentucky races. And
have you ever been to the Derby, Lucky?
No, I never have.
Well,
I never have.
Would you like to go sometime?
Yeah. I think it'd be great.
All right. Well, I'll see what we can do to try and arrange that for you because I have some friends who are involved.
He used to get a bunch of buddies, and they would get a Pullman car and have it pulled up on the tracks right outside of Churchill Downs, and they'd sit there for a week, and they would drink and play poker and bet on the horses and everything. And every time he would come home, my mother would meet him at the door and say, well, how did you do? And his answer was always the same. I just broke even.
I just broke even. I think I covered my expenses. There's a phrase in the book. You talk about that. That's how I know that about your daddy. So, but he was, even though he was a Baptist deacon, America back then, a lot of folks, if you lived in Tennessee, right, and you went to some church, and that was part of the cultural thing, but it didn't always make its way into home to where there was a genuine faith. And even the fact that that the 10 commandments would be in your mind, thou shalt not kill. And they didn't even really give you any instructions why a soldier at war is different than an individual who can't murder their neighbor, but why, like it talks about in Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2 in the Bible, the difference between murdering somebody out of anger or disgust, and then the government is a minister of God for good, right? And we put down evil. We praise those who do right, and we prosecute those who do evil, which is what you were doing. In effect, you were a minister of God to suppress the evil of the fascism that was represented by Germany. But no one ever really walked you through that. They just kind of let you go, and you want to go kill those Nazis.
You had to sort that out for yourself. And when the going really got tough, when you were wounded or your comrades in the plane were being wounded, or you were being shot at, you'd have to really reach down inside and say, hey, man, you got to see this through.
Right.
And that's a tough thing to do.
Do you know, there's a story in here about Sully. And when he was writing, I think you talk about in here, was a friend called Grady. Does that ring a bell? That Sully was a big journaler, right?
Yes.
And he wrote a lot of. Do you remember that one of the things, because your friend Sully, right? He was lost in the war, right?
He was lost at his base. He came up to visit me, and I took him up in a B-17, and he looked at me and he said, Buster, this ain't flying. You're nothing but a truck driver. So let's land and you fly my spit, and you'll learn what flying's all about.
Yeah.
So he said, you got to come down and visit me at my base, which was only about 40 miles away.
You couldn't believe that. Your best friend who goes up there and gets involved, he's flying in Egypt, and all of a sudden you guys are 40 miles away from each other in England. So he came up, he flew in your truck with you, and then you went down and talk about, did you ever make it down there? That part.
Well, I did, and when I identified his base and landed, I had to stand on the brakes because the runways of the fighter field are only half as long as a bomber's. And as I was standing on the brakes to keep from running off the end, I saw this smoking wreckage off to the side of the runway. And I didn't think too much about it until I went up to headquarters and asked to see his quarters, and they said, well, you have to see the CO because we lost him yesterday afternoon.
So you saw actually the wreckage.
So he was taking off in this, he'd been transitioned to this Hawker Hurricane, which was a vicious airplane. It was so overpowered that you had to keep full opposite rudder just to keep it on the runway as you were taking off. And he and a wingman were taking off the afternoon before I got there. And just as they cleared the runway, his engine quit, and he just cartwheeled in. And he never knew what hit him. So he was killed in England, not in combat, but not in Europe. He wasn't flying for the Americans. He was flying for the king.
Yeah.
And consequently, they buried him, gave him a full military funeral there at his old air base. But they would not return his remains because, that is, the Americans wouldn't, because he wasn't flying for us.
Well, and I know that was you talk in the book about your conversation with his mom. She was frustrated with you that you couldn't get his remains home. But let me just go back to what we were talking about, because just real quickly, this is an interesting story too. You talked about how your one injury was the frostbite that you had, but you did have some shrapnel one time hit you in the chest, but it didn't penetrate.
Well, it did penetrate my flight suit. And I had this New Testament that my mom had given me in my breast pocket, and it creased the cover of that, or it would have gone right into my heart.
That you had the Bible over your heart, and it protected a piece of shrapnel. And so you carried that Bible every time right there. It had a little crease from shrapnel that went on. What a crazy story. That and Eleanor's silk stocking went around your neck.
Yep. Those were my two talismans. We all had our superstitions.
Yeah. Well, so do you mind if I ask you a little bit though? Is about the superstition and so you grew up with a daddy who was a deacon. You have a Bible that saved your life,
right?
What is your view? I mean, because and then you've got this amazing name, Lucky, right? Which I thought the way Maurer ended the book was just incredible. What he said, it describes all your life. But he was a pilot, he was a husband, he was an officer in the Air Force. He survived all these different combat missions. He's a World War II veteran, but most of all, he was damn lucky. That's the way your book ends, right? But you have this amazing, this amazing life story. And we did talk about about providence, not luck. And when you think about that Bible being over your heart, I'm really curious about a man like yourself, because what I was going to do, I was going to pull up that one little story about Sully, because I don't know if you remember when he was writing his friend Grady, and he ended up being told by a friend from Poland, go marry a rich English woman, right?
Right.
And he did find one, but she was married.
He did find one, but she was married.
Yes. And yet he realized, and this is another thing that happens in war, right? You get over there, you see this death, you see mortality, right? And your heart kind of grows cold in effect.
Well, it had a different impact than losing any of my comrades in the group, because when they went down, they were just gone. There wasn't any memorial. There wasn't any funeral. There wasn't any mention of them. You just collected their belongings and shipped them home. And we didn't have time to grieve. We just had to get in the airplane and go out and do it again the next day. So it was a different type of closure that I was seeking, and so was Ms. Sullivan. She wanted closure as well, but it was ironic that just because he was not a member of the Air Force or the Air Corps, they would not return his remains.
Well, what I was going to share with you from Sully's life is that gal that he had a relationship with, even though she was married. He started writing. He just said, I'm not really sure about religion anymore, right? And
no, and I'm sure he had a premonition that he wasn't coming home. Yeah. He writes to Grady at one point and says, if I die, just remember there'll always be a little piece of Tennessee here. And that was his attitude and his philosophy as to what he was doing. And I don't think that he expected really to survive.
But one of the things that happened too is whatever that Tennessee, because this is, and I am specifically now having a conversation a little bit about spiritual things, because I really am curious. You've lived to be 103, right? When you got in that plane, you knew that you had three things that were going to happen. You were either going to come back, which was not very likely. You were going to get killed in a wreck, or you were going to get shot down, be able to eject, and become a prisoner of war. One of those three things was going to happen. And the least likely was that you would make it back.
Yes.
Lucky
there was a fourth, and that was that if you got shot down and didn't get captured, that you'd try to get contact with the Maquis, the underground, and evade, and
okay, good.
Eventually make it back.
Yep. But
that was next to zero.
Okay, but now
very few got to do that.
Very few did that. Yeah. But you're 103, and there's 100% chance that you probably won't make 120. Right? I mean, I hope you do. I hope I get to interview you in 10 years. But whether it's 120 or 130 or 104, There's going to be a day when you're not lucky enough to take a breath and enjoy whiskey at night.
True.
So what would you do? So are a man that survived and had survived so many life-threatening, just unbelievable odds against surviving being a part of the Bloody 100th and flying those missions, as untrained and as exposed as you were. There's gonna come a moment of your mortality. It's coming at some point. And so, do you think much about death? Do you think about standing before a creator God and giving an account? Is that something that you wrestle with, or is it just out of sight, out of mind, and not something you've bothered with?
Not really, because I don't think any of us are certain that will ever happen.
What's that? Stand before creator God?
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't know what's beyond the curtain.
Yeah.
And we don't know if we just won't wake up the next morning, or if we're going to be involved in a serious accident that takes our lives.
What do you think? What would you say? I mean, you've got the wisdom of 103 years of human life and experience. You've been to countless funerals. You were married, Lucky, for 71 years.
Correct.
You lost your sweet wife, Bobby, just 8 years ago?
8 years ago.
Yeah, she died 8 years ago. And what a great story about, y'all coming together and your life that you enjoyed. And is your daughter still alive?
Yes.
Yeah. Where does she live?
She lives in Ashley Falls, Massachusetts.
Ashley Falls, Massachusetts.
She's married to a neurosurgeon, a pediatric neurosurgeon.
Wow.
And who's just retired. And they've rebuilt this 1890 house there on an estate that they bought. And she'll meet me in New Orleans with my grandson and great-grandson.
Wow.
Next month at our group reunion. And of course, I'm the only pilot and the only member that I know of the original group that went overseas that's still standing, of the Bloody 100th Bomb Group.
So when you talk to somebody like me who's 4 decades behind you, by the way, how old is your great-grandson today?
He's 12.
You have a great-grandson who's 12. Amazing.
And then I have 2 great-grandchildren and their parents living in Australia.
Okay, so you have do you have 2 children? Is that right? Your daughter and you have other
I only had 1 child.
Okay,
and she had 2.
She had 2, and you have, and one of those grandchildren has 2 children living in Australia. And how old are they? Are they older?
No, they're 14 and 9.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask, I had a really interesting story in my family. I had a grandmother who was 17 when she had my father, and I think her mother was 17 when she had her, and her mother was 16 when she had her. So I knew my great-great-grandmother.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, this is wild. My great-grandmother on my father's side was younger than my grandmother on my mother's side. Interesting, silly fact about me. But let me ask you about this silly fact. So I look at you, and one of the things we love to do is we ask our older, wiser,
not necessarily
humans.
wiser.
Okay. Well, so when you tell people, when folks, when you're 103, do people, when you talk about death much, or when you were talking even to young guys over there back when you were in your 20s, and you knew that there was a good chance that not all of you were going back home, did you guys talk much about death when you were young men?
You didn't let yourself.
Yeah.
If you dwelt on your odds, the statistics, you'd drive yourself nuts.
Well, one of the things you said is the scariest part of your flight.
Yeah.
Was that initial climb up into the cockpit, because you knew what that meant.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested, Lucky, with when you when you say, and let me be a little bold with you if I could, because one of the things that's so interesting about your story is you've had experiences that I'll never have. You've lived through things I'll never live through. And again, I have so much respect for you, so much gratitude for what you did. And even your humility is encouraging to me. I love the way you respond to the question that I asked you about what do you think about this generation? And you said, let's not suppose they wouldn't do the same thing. And we do have some examples of guys after 9/11 that jumped in and did amazing. I think about a story of Pat Tillman, who's an NFL All-Pro defensive back who walks away from all that to go and enlist and serve and become an Army Ranger and sacrifices his life. There were lots of people I have lots of friends who enlisted after 9/11, said, I'm going to go fight this evil that did this to our country, which is, their 9/11 was your Pearl Harbor moment. Mm-hmm. And I do think we have some examples of nobility. But I just see in general what we see in our country is a lot of people who are a little slower in growing up than they used to be. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and whose mindset you have a hard time understanding.
Yeah.
Or I do.
Yeah, I do too. So but you talk a lot to young people. And how do you challenge them?
Well, again, as I believe I told you, I think that each individual has to realize their responsibility toward doing everything in their power to protect what we hold so dear, or we'll lose it. Our democracy is very vulnerable, constantly under attack.
Yeah.
And if we don't consciously do everything in our power to make sure that it's recognized and valued, we're going to lose it.
Yes, sir. What do you think about the America you've seen today with the America of 60 years ago? Do you have much hope for America surviving another 60 years based on what you see trending?
Well, I always have hope, Todd. I think it's miraculous almost that our form of government, the democracy, that we hold so dear and is so valuable and so important, even though it gets seriously injured and attacked, that it rises up. And when push comes to shove, in the final analysis, good will prevail over the evil that is constantly being thwarted.
Yep.
Or we have to thwart. I have to believe that, or all's lost.
Yep. Freedom is, as one person has said, is always one generation away from extinction. Right.
Yep.
Each of us have to do what we need to do to preserve the freedom that we have. Right.
Yep.
And to work to fight and maintain
it's
this
not
democracy.
free.
Freedom is not free, as you and your friends who gave so much have shown
but
us.
But the one remaining thing that I have yet to do in the time I have left is to get Congress to declare a Home Front Heroes Day to acknowledge the tremendous contribution that the civilians, those who weren't in uniform, contributed to those who were, or we never would have prevailed.
Yep. What was the gal's name? Rosie the Riveter? Is that what?
Yeah.
But those kind of people, or even
those
Mrs.
kinds
Sullivan,
of people
who gave her husband and gave her son,
have never been acknowledged as to what they have contributed to our success and are still contributing today.
Yeah,
we've still got troops overseas that they're supplying and supporting, and we outproduced the world. We didn't know we could do that.
Yeah,
and that was the greatest miscalculation that both the Japanese as well as the Germans made. Right.
They woke the sleeping giant and the will of the American people.
Exactly.
Well, I'm glad you said it, because some friends of mine that are in the government will watch this. And I love that. That's one of the things, again, I love about you, Sully. Lucky, that you're so self-effacing in the way that you, even when you talk about your life, you say, what I'd like to see Congress do is acknowledge the people that stayed behind, that made it possible for us to go represent the country over there. It does take both, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. Well, good.
And without both, you're not going to survive.
Well, good. I hope somebody watches this and gets a hold of you.
But they never believed that we could outproduce the world, not only for ourselves, but all our allies.
Yeah.
And the women came out of the homes and they went into the factories and the offices, and they did things they didn't know they could do.
Yep.
And they did them extremely well. And once the genie was out of the bottle, it never went back.
Yeah.
That was the emancipation of women in America.
Yeah, when they stood up and saw what they could do and
absolutely
what needed them to do. So let me ask you this, because you've been talked to a lot of times. Are you ever surprised? There's a question that people don't ask you, like, just when you start to think about the amazing the bank of stories that you have and all the how to make a marriage successful for 71 years. What's your best marriage advice? When you were married for 71 years, what's your best marriage advice?
Well, my best marriage advice, and I am asked that, not infrequently, was the advice that the rector gave my bride and I when we went for counseling before the wedding. And he said, I have to tell you that marriage is just a matter of making little adjustments. And when you think about that, you really think about that, you realize that the man and the women don't always grow or mature at the same rate.
Yeah.
And as their marriage grows, they may be growing apart instead of together.
Yeah.
And they don't always necessarily think alike or act alike. And over time, that may be something to contend with, that you have to make a little adjustment about.
There's God's word says, for this cause a man shall leave his mother and father, cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And the old kind of joke is that most people fight over the first 5 years over whose flesh they're going to become, right? Lucky's or Bobby's. And that's not the idea at all. It's about it's a new creation, right? Like you said, It's a little bit of Lucky, a little bit of Bobby. You both make sacrifices, and you have an other-centered mindset where you love and serve each other. So that advice that rector gave you is good advice. It's about constantly having a mindset towards how can I show my love for you by not trying to conform you to my image.
And it doesn't have to be all my way or all her way.
Yeah.
You have to come together and accommodate each other's differences.
Yeah. You ever heard this?
And learn to live with it.
Amen. You ever heard a guy say this, that someone asked a guy how he's had such a long, successful marriage? He says, well, that's easy. He said, my wife and I we've never had a fight in 7 decades, because before we got married, we said that she would make all the little decisions and I would make all the big decisions. And because we agreed to that, we've never had a fight. Now, we've also never made a big decision in our 70 years of marriage. But that old joke stands. So, all right, I this is where I'm going to be bold with you, okay? Because I really am curious, Lucky, when you say none of us know what's on the other side. But I'm going to share with you a story that somebody told me. I want to hear what you think of that sometime. And this is a story about a guy that he had a guy that worked for him that was that he really loved. All right, can I borrow your cane for a second?
Sure.
Okay. And so what he did, and this guy loved him, but he was a fool. He was considered just kind of the dumbest guy in his kingdom, but he was loyal. He loved him because he was a great loyal friend. And he was so frustrated one day. He said, "Let me just tell you something." He said, "I'm going to give you a stick." And he goes, "I'm just curious." He goes, "You hold this stick the rest of your life, and I want you to hold on to it until you find somebody dumber than you, and then I want you to give him the stick." He goes, "Okay." So his friend served him faithfully his entire life, and he was dumb. Remember? And at the end of his master's life, his master was calling people that he loved to him. And he said, go get my fool friend to me, who's always been loyal, but I want to see if he still has a stick. And so the guy shows up with his stick. And his master looks at him and he says, fool friend, he goes, I want to talk to you. I wanted to see how you're doing. The guy says, well, I'm doing fine, master, but why'd you call me to see? He said, well, and he didn't know how to explain death to his friend. And so what he said to his friend was, well, I'm going on a journey. And he says, oh my goodness, master. He goes, well, you're going on a journey? He says, yes. He goes, well, how long will you be gone? He goes, I think I'm not really sure how long I'll be gone, but I think for a long time. And he says, well, what do you need, master, when you get there? And he goes, well, I really don't need to know what I'm going to need when I get there. And he says, so master, let me get this. He goes, well, how long have you known you're going to go on this journey? He goes, I've known my whole life I'm going to go on this journey. And the fool looked at his master and said, so you're telling me you're going on a journey that you've known your entire life that you were going to need to go on. You don't really you don't know when you get there what you're going to need. And you've done nothing really to prepare for your journey. And the master said, that's right. And then the fool looked at him and said, well, master, here's your stick. Isn't that a good story?
Yes.
And so I look at you and I'm just like, it's one thing to not know what's on the other side, but you've had 103 years to consider that, right? And God even put you, Lucky, in a place where you had to examine every day if this was going to be your last day on earth, more than most men.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why you had to kind of suppress that a little bit then in order to get back in that cockpit, and a very courageous thing to do. But have you never, have you never really thought about your mortality seriously, to where, like, what do I need on the other side? If there is a God and he is there, what is it that would bring me peace with him? Right?
Not really.
Has anybody...
To be honest with you, I've never really given that consideration.
Well, let me ask you, if I may, let me ask you a question, because is there anybody that you've ever watched their life and respected them and said, if there is a God and he does exist, that would be the kind of man that would represent him and would honor him? And have you ever asked somebody that has a faith and why they have a faith, what their assurance is as we prepare for this journey that all, one of the things that I think that Bible that protected your heart says in the Old Testament is that when we die, we go the way of all the earth, right? It's appointed for man to die once. And the Bible says after this comes judgment. And I'm curious, if there is a God and he is there, do you know what at least the Bible says is the central message of the scripture and what it takes to have peace with God? Has anybody ever explained that to you in 103 years? Do you know what the central message of the Bible is?
Not explicitly, no.
Yeah. Well,
I think that's a matter of individual interpretation.
Yeah. Well,
and it isn't a matter particularly of what somebody else thinks it is, because they don't know any more than I do.
Well, I agree.
They can't.
Well, you mean no one's been there and been back to testify.
That's right.
There's maybe a few examples if the biblical record is historical fact, like I would think it is. But how about this? Let's just not talk about whether or not that's happened. I would say, the Bible certainly is a book of historical import, correct? I mean, it's been used in literature. It's been used to form nations. It's been used to write the Magna Carta, by and large, was a major influence on that, which was a major influence on our Constitution. The Bible, without, I think, any debate, is an important, significant book in human history. Do you know what the central message of the scripture is? Like, if I had to ask you, if you boil the Bible down, let's not talk about whether it's the inspired word of God or not, but if you boiled the Bible down and asked yourself, what is the central message of the Bible? Do you know the answer to that question?
Well, not explicitly, but I would think, since you ask it, that my answer would be along the lines of, basically, and underlying it all, it's the lesson that I would divine from the Bible,
mm-hmm.
and to me, is to do unto others as you would be do as you would do unto yourself, and be selfless instead of selfful.
You've modeled that really well, Lucky. I mean, even the way you answered questions that I've asked you, I watched the way you serve our country, and you just quoted from the Sermon on the Mount that's what we commonly call the golden rule.
Yeah.
Right? Which what Jesus says, if you want to sum it all up, right? But what's interesting, because this is what the Bible also says. Not only does it say, because someone asked Jesus, what's the greatest law? And he says, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And how do you love your neighbor? Well, you do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is different than Confucius, because Confucius, he said, don't do to people what you don't want them to do to you. It's a passive thing. But Jesus says, no, you have to actively do for people what you want them to do for you.
Yeah.
And I would tell you that I look at your life with a great deal of admiration, because I perceive men like you as doing that a lot better than most. And so again, thank you. But I think you would also agree with me you haven't done it perfectly. Is that fair to say? That there have been moments that, that you didn't do to others? Like
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Oh,
so
yeah,
so
sure.
here's so I was going to tease you a little bit, because Bobby, you might have done a really good job with. Eleanor probably doesn't think so much. Her silk stockings got you through all those flights over France and Germany, but then you had to get on a train to come down to see you and said, there's no ring in that finger when you're going home, okay? I'm telling you, you did such a great job with your book. I really was so blessed by it and so encouraged by it. Here's Lucky, if I could, again, just share with you as a friend. Here's the central message of the scripture, all right? It's that we should do unto others as God has done unto us, but none of us does that the way that we should. And the Bible calls that sin. And sin's what separates us from a perfect God. And the wages of sin is death. There's a certain aspect to us that it kills relationships, and it kills our ability to have a relationship with God. That's what sin always does. It destroys relationships. War is a result of the sin of man and our national interest and our inability to do what's best for one another. And that puts nations at war with each other. But anyway,
War is stupid.
war is stupid. War is hell. And it's actually, there's a great quote. Were you a friend of the show MASH? You ever watch MASH?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. There's a great quote in there where it actually, Hawkeye in that show says war is not as bad as hell, because hell is even worse than war. Actually, he says the other way around, and I'm getting us lost right here. So let me stay very focused to what I was doing. War is stupid, and war is a result of the stupidity of man that creates conflict, and sin creates conflict with God. And here's the central message of the Bible: it's not that Lucky and Todd have got to do more good than evil. We don't have to work our way to God. God is kind and gracious and loving and wants a relationship with us, but sin separates us from him. And what God does is he pursues us. He pursued us through the life, and then the death, and then the payment, and then the affirmation of that payment through the resurrection of his son. Okay? That he made him who knew no sin to become sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. That the wages of our sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ, our Lord. The message of the Bible is you can't be saved as an imperfect man by trying to be more perfect. We've already blown it.
Yeah.
But that God will make provision for us. But what he wants us to do is acknowledge his kindness and his goodness and embrace that. And Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, and blessed are those who mourn. Okay, and blessed are those then who in meekness surrendered him, and who hunger and thirst for righteousness, which we find not in our own actions but in Christ. So the central message of the Bible, if I had to cut it all down, is it's not what we do for God, but it's accepting what God has done for us. And he says that that's how we have peace with God. We have peace with God through trusting in his provision. And then one of the ways it's not like we can just say some magic words and it doesn't matter what we do. One of the ways we know that we believe is we respond to God's kindness and revelation by beginning to do all we can to walk in obedience to him. But at the end of the day, it's not our obedience. Our obedience doesn't save us. It's our acknowledgement of our disobedience, right? And our asking for God to be the provision for our disobedience through the perfect provision of his Son that gives us peace with God. So the central message of the Bible is it's not what you or I do that gets us to be saved. It's acknowledging that a holy God we could never save ourselves by, and if he didn't provide for us a way, we'd be separated from him. And I share that with you because, Lucky, I want you to know that I have so much respect for you and gratitude for you. And if I believe that's true, the worst thing I could do is withhold that information from you. And to tell you that you're going to go on that journey, right? And you need to know what you need on the other side. And what you need is peace with God that I believe you can only have through the one that has been with God and that has been raised from the dead, and that God declared with power as his Son by raising him from the dead, that you and I could have peace with him. Now, we'll see if that's true.
All I can say to you, Todd, is that I find after over a century of living,
yes,
that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to fathom why God has let you live as long as you have.
Right.
That your destiny and your fate is not in your hands and never has been.
Yep.
But why is the guy on your left and the guy on your right removed from the picture and you're left standing?
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that through the war I wrestled with in my own conscience.
As survivor's guilt.
And still not allowed myself to wallow in self-pity.
Yeah.
That, oh, Lord, why am I in this position?
Yeah.
Of not knowing from 1 minute to the next whether it's going to be my last.
Yes, sir.
Seek as you may, you won't find the answer to that.
Well, I agree with you. The answer to why me and not him, or why him and not me, I agree with you. Other than I can just tell you that there's a God, I think, who is sovereign, and whether we call it luck or providence, right? A sovereign God makes choices that you and I can't make. And what I would tell you is the Bible does say this, it's that God is patient towards us. And so I don't know, like, what a kindness for you to sit and visit with me. But part of what I would say is, if you're going to live 103 years, I'm going to live 61, and God's going to let us collide for an afternoon, right? I want to make sure that I go, if there's a gift that I can give this man that I respect, who put his life at risk for me, and I didn't share with you what I believe as I've looked at history, and I looked at the evidence for the Bible and the evidence for who Jesus being who he claimed to be. If I didn't share that with you for you to consider, I would go, I couldn't call myself your friend, right? And the Bible says he's patient towards you. Or, God is not slow as some count slowness, but he's patient towards you, wishing that none should perish, but that all should come to eternal life. So all I would say is maybe, just maybe, one of the reasons he let you live to be 103 is so you could meet me at 61. And I could say,
well be.
Consider this. Just consider these things as you lay in bed at night, and just say, you know what, God, if you're there, and I'm going to have to give an account for my life, and there's provision for me that I couldn't otherwise have apart from faith, don't let me miss that. As you have sip your scotch tonight, just make that your prayer and just say, God, if you're there, don't let me miss you, because I want to have peace with you. And I think it's through Christ. And I will tell you that one of the things that I know in a much shorter way, but that's very real to me, is one of the reasons I have peace today, and I'm not speaking German, is because of men like you. And what you did as a courageous 20-year-old, and then the way you continue to live your life so generously towards others in a way that's a blessing to me. And I want to really thank you, Lucky. And I feel very lucky, fortunate to have met you and to learn from your life, and to laugh at your stories, and to be sharpened by it. Have you ever heard the song by Kenny Chesney, Don't Blink? That was one of the questions I wanted to ask you today. Do you know who Kenny Chesney's a country artist? Have you ever heard that song?
No.
The song basically just says, don't blink, because 100 years goes faster than you think.
Yeah.
I'm Lucky. I'm telling you, you're so sharp. And you haven't once not heard what I said today. In terms of just talking to you, I marvel at your virility and your health, and the clarity of mind that you have. But that song, I mean, when you think about that, if I'm blessed, I'll live 4 more decades to be your age. And you would probably tell me, Todd, you won't believe how fast those 4 decades are going to go. True?
Yep.
I mean, would you look getting to live 103? That's rare air. But you know how quickly it goes.
Well, it does, and still, as you look back on it, and you think, well, what does it mean? What am I leaving as a legacy?
Yes, sir.
That when I'm gone, I won't just be forgotten. Because when you look at all of your friends and relatives, no matter how long they've lived or haven't, what their contribution has been in the time that they had is what's important. Because more often than not, when you think about it, no matter how much or how important one's life is, it's soon forgotten. It's soon forgotten. Yeah. Because life goes on, and those that are left have to make their contribution, yep, or not.
Do you know the wisest man that ever lived said those exact words? In the book of Ecclesiastes, that's exactly what he says. And he says, in fact, that life is vanity as a result of that. Mm-hmm. And like what use is there? Because one generation comes and another follows, and then we're just forgotten. And because honestly, you think about that. Our grandchildren know who we are, maybe our great grandchildren, but their grandchildren are not going to remember who we are. Now you're unique in that they'll always be able to go to the World War II Museum and talk to you through that little AI, but yeah, still, you think about how few people are going to go to that little museum.
Yeah, true enough.
So, but your legacy, our legacy when we're alive, is what do we do for our fellow men, right? Mm-hmm. And you've done a lot, and I want to thank you. And I continue. I see you keep doing. You're 103, and you took out an entire afternoon to come spend some time with me.
If you could inspire in your lifetime,
yeah,
one other person,
yeah,
to do something significant or to make their life meaningful, your life's been a success.
Amen. And I'll even stretch that a little bit. If you can use your finite life to help a person understand eternity, your life has made an eternal difference. Right? And I do believe, Lucky, I believe you are created to stand before your Creator and give an account for your life. And I've seen a lot in you, just from a distance and up close, that you do unto others. You live by the golden rule, but you don't do it perfectly. And I want to tell you that God loves.
Who does?
Well, none of us, which is why we all need a Savior.
Yes.
And I hope that you go back to your Baptist roots, and you know it's more than a child's story. That those 10 commandments weren't given to us as a standard by which we might accomplish perfection, but it shows us that none of us live those 10 commandments perfectly. We all fall short.
True.
But God doesn't fall short in loving Lucky and loving me. And that makes us more than lucky. That makes us blessed. But we've got to acknowledge that and accept that gift. And as I thought about our time together today, man, all the stories that we've talked about, And there's so many more from your life we could tell. I want to make sure that I love my friend Lucky by telling the greatest story ever told. That is a God that left the presence of heaven and came and gave himself for us. That men like us could be reconciled to him and have peace. And I want to give you that gift. It's up to yours to grab it and prepare for that journey. But
do my best.
Well, I just in closing, Major Luckadoo, I wanted to say on behalf of many people who won't have this privilege, thank you. I really do feel like I'm getting to sit and visit with a man that has given himself for others and continues to. I first heard your name from Adam, our mutual friend, when he said that you were going to go spend time with a bunch of high school boys, just a small group of boys, that you were going to sit and share your life story and impart some wisdom for them and give them. And I said, tell me about Lucky. And he explained who you were. And then after that, Masters of the Air comes out, right? And then I pick up your book, and it's just a real privilege to meet you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your having me.
Thank you, sir.
Good luck.
Yeah. Well, is there a story that you go? I'm always surprised that people don't ask about this story that you get to tell. Like, what's your favorite story when you look back over your life? What's your favorite, like, most memorable story that you love to share? Do you have one?
Not really. You may have heard me say, I got to a stage. Well, let me backtrack just one step, and that is that when I came home from overseas after fighting the war and nearly dying many times.
I'm going to push this to you a little bit while you're talking this, but go ahead.
I didn't want to talk about it. I did not talk about it. I wanted to forget it. It was not the happiest time in my life.
Right.
It wasn't the happiest experience that I could have had. And I wanted to compartmentalize it and just say that's a closed chapter. I don't want to burden my family or my friends or others with my story or what happened to me. It's not important. But as far as my welfare is concerned and my peace of mind and knowing who I am and what I am as best I can, I want to forget it. And then in 1999, 50 years later, when the chancellor of the University of Texas, North Texas, said, well, Lucky, I have a symposium each year where I ask an academic to come and talk about war from an historical standpoint. And then we have a question and answer, and then we retire to the luncheon room, and I have a veteran who's lived it and experienced it.
Not from an academic, but an actual perspective.
Be the luncheon speaker. Would you be the luncheon speaker? And I said, well, I haven't done that before. And so reluctantly, I said, I'll give it a try. And when I was finished, I got a standing ovation. And he turned to me and he said, Lucky, I'm compiling a book of what I think were the best presentations of both the academic side and the veteran side. And I'd like to include yours if you wrote it down. And I said, well, yes, I must confess I did write it because I didn't know what I wanted to say or how I wanted to say it. And so he included it in his book called Warriors and Scholars.
What a great title.
By he was a full colonel, Al Huxley, and you can find his book Warriors and Scholars, and it was the first chapter in his book, so I felt very flattered. But as a result of that presentation, there were people in the audience that said, would you come and speak to my students, or you come and speak to my group? And this is the sort of thing that got me on the rubber chicken circuit.
You were 76 when you did that, and now, would you say, is that right? You said it was 1999, so if my math is right, that's 27 years ago. 20. Yeah, so if my math is right, you're close to that, yeah. And so, but look at how you've used the last 3 decades to do just that. And that's what I mean. I that rubber chicken circuit, it's more than a rubber chicken circuit. You are, I mean, I was just so encouraged, inspired by your story. And I'm telling you, at the World War II Museum, when the docent said, this is my favorite testimony.
Well, that's very flattering.
Isn't that flattering?
And I'm very, very pleased. But apparently, I'm able to speak extemporaneously.
You are.
And express myself reasonably satisfactorily, or I wouldn't still be here. I'd be tarred and feathered and run out of town.
No.
But when I got to the point some years ago, before I lost my wife, that I said, I'm awfully weary. I'm tired. I've heard my story. I'm sick of it. And I've told it so many different ways and all. I'm going to hang it up. And she said, you can't. You have an obligation and a duty, as long as you can, to express what you have experienced to successive generations, or else they wouldn't be here.
Well, we need your example. We need you to call us to greatness.
So out of respect for her, as she was far wiser than I, to even have recognized that I wasn't a good candidate for the trash can when I came back, or else I would have ended up really a ne'er-do-well, I'm sure.
Well, your story is when you came back. Yeah, you know, I know you were headed to Stanford. I know the GI Bill. That story about how that commanding officer was going to not allow you to go because he was mad you didn't go to West Point and didn't want you to receive the same benefits as him, and all that stuff that's in your story, and how you just continued to persevere, how you honored Bobby. You know what I thought was just a fun story too that was in your book was you're the only guy I ever knew who, when you got married and your father-in-law was standing there and the pastor said, who gives this man to be this woman's wife? What did he do? He didn't say a word. He just stood there silently until finally, was it his mother that got up and jerked him down?
Right.
What were you thinking in that moment?
Well, I didn't like him anyway. And
it sounded like it was pretty mutual.
He didn't have any love for me. And I couldn't really fathom why he had this, took this position. He had 3 daughters. This was his middle daughter. And he was later found out that he was an American diplomat.
Yeah.
And he was very ambitious that each of his 3 daughters would marry aristocrats or royalty. And a captain in the Air Force was neither.
That just wasn't going to do, huh?
It didn't measure up. But he never relented. And he only lived 15 months after we were married.
Yeah.
He died in his sleep.
Yeah.
He was about to sail to, he was in Bryan, Texas. He was about to sail from New Orleans down to Montevideo to take over his post as ambassador to Uruguay.
Yeah.
And he didn't wake up.
He didn't wake up.
At 52 years of age.
Wow. And you were faithful to his daughter for the next 70 years, right? 71 in total.
71 years.
Let me just tell you, as a dad who's got 3 little girls, I got 3 boys and 3 girls. If I could find a man that would be faithful to love my daughter and then to honor her the way you're honoring Bobby today by continuing to tell your story, he's lucky to have you as a son-in-law.
Well, I don't know that she was as lucky as I was.
You make that clear, and that's all of our goal, right? Is to outpunt our coverage, right?
Absolutely, she was really a gem, and she was the luckiest thing that happened to me.
Yeah,
I had a lot of good luck, but she was the best.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. You're so kind to come and spend again this time with me.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
I'm very grateful, and I hope there's some way I can be creative in the thank you. I've got an idea. I'm going to try and pull it off. I've got 2, right? I'll just tell you. One is going to be that will get you down there at Churchill Downs, and the other one's going to be to try and get some congressperson to pick up, what you're passionate about and celebrate how'd you say it? The home front heroes?
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough last week to have an audience with Ross Perot Jr. And he introduced me to the House of Representative from Alaska who agreed to take it on and present it to the House. 3 years ago, I got it through the House with Colin Allred. Yeah. And unfortunately, because it wasn't attached to another bill and got passed on to the Senate, by the end of the year, it died.
And Allred hadn't picked it back up for you?
And he got so engrossed with chasing Cruz that it got lost in the shuffle. But we've got a real, I think, opportunity with this guy from Alaska.
Good.
So I'm going to pursue that to the nth degree.
Good. What do you think about politics today? Do you get disgusted by it? Or are you still pretty engaged with that kind of affairs?
I avoid it like the plague. And my goodness, to be very personally, particularly honest with you, I think we're in such jeopardy that it isn't funny.
Yeah.
That the entire world is feeling the consequences of the idiocy, and I can't put any other term to it, that we're experiencing by having felons run the government.
Is it Mark Twain who said, "There are idiots and there are congresspersons, but I repeat myself"? Or something along those lines?
No, it's scary. It really is scary because we have people that should be in jail that are actually in authority and are doing things that our great-grandchildren are going to have to pay for.
Well, thank you again. So I'm going to think of ways I can be creative in my kindness back towards you. But you are an American hero, and I'm very grateful to be your friend.